What an honor to talk to this group, firefighters, EMTs, what you do for your communities. And talking to you is a special honor for me in a way that goes beyond what Senator Schumer said about your heroic service. And that is, you all are leaders in your communities. And Ken Melman, who was President George W. Bush's campaign manager in 2004. Some of you have worked with him, some of you have worked against him, some of you worked against him and are now working with him now. But he used to say that in any given group of 10 people in a community, that there's one person that the others look to for their advice about sports, about music, about movies, about politics, and ultimately about how to vote. And that can be a Little League coach, it can be a Sunday school teacher, it can be a local elected official, it can be a car dealer, it can be a small business person, it can be a union leader, and it can be the kind of leadership that you provide in your working unit. So love to talk with people who are influential and informed, and it's exciting to do that. Now, President Shaberger, thank you for referring to my service in Virginia before I came up here, where a buddy of mine who grew up on a pecan farm, he says that what we do up here, both the journalists and the think tank folks and the lawmakers, he describes what we do as selling air. And luckily he didn't describe what kind of air, but before I was up here and I was in Virginia covering real people, one of the first campaigns I covered, the first really big campaign that I covered, remember when Oliver North, the Iran-Contra guy, ran for Senate? And he liked us to call him Colonel. We actually called him Ollie, but he liked us to call him Colonel North. And whenever he gave a talk, he would start by saying, every morning I read the Bible and the Washington Post. Get both sides. And that's a little bit the way that the press guy in any particular room hears. What I'm going to do, I'm going to real quick walk you through a little bit what's going on between the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, go a little bit behind the curtain of what both the congressional leaders and the White House is planning for the coming months. We're going to look ahead a little bit to 2016. We're going to talk a little bit about tech, pick up a little bit on some of the points, go beyond some of the points that Jim Messina made to you yesterday in his great talk. And then I'd love to bring you into the conversation if you have some hardball questions or if you want to rebut or argue with what I'm going to do. The first point I'm going to make is Mars and Venus. And Mars and Venus are the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, this White House, this congressional leadership, and usually I like to be Mr. Sunshine. Usually many of you I've worked with over the years, many of you know that I tend to be the optimistic one. But I can tell you that there is no sign that the two planets at the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue are coming together, and we had new evidence of this just 2 Saturday nights ago at the Gridiron Dinner, which is one of those dinners in D.C. It's the last one that's white tails. Where not only do they want your normal measurements, they want to know your top hat size when you go and rent your suit, and I did not know my top hat size, but it's a fancy dinner that's off camera, and President Obama was kind of come and speak to it this year. And during one of the breaks in the dinner at that time, when people are sort of milling around, escaping the person that they were seated next to and that they'd run out of things to say to, people were milling around, and Kevin McCarthy, the number 3 House Republican, the House Majority Whip from Bakersfield in my native California, I'm a Seal Beach guy from the OC, he saw, and this is how Kevin McCarthy told the story to me. He said he saw an empty chair next to the president and said, this is my chance to make my point. And so he went up to the president. He was walking up. He was thinking, there's this break in this dinner. If this were Bill Clinton, he'd be working the room. The room would be working him. This guy really is a loner. So he walked up, but it was his chance. So there was an empty chair, and Kevin McCarthy told me that the president was on his BlackBerry when he went up there. And when he got his attention, he said to him, they just had that dinner at the Jefferson Hotel between the president and some of the Republican senators, which revived conversation that something grand was going to happen in Washington, that there was going to be some big accomplishment on the budget, some big change in Medicare. And he said that when he went up to the president said, "When is my dinner invitation? When am I coming to dinner?" He's joshing around. And he said, the president said, "I work with Paul," referring to Ryan. "I trust Paul," because he respects, however much he disagrees with him, the president respects Paul Ryan's intellect, which is important to him. It's why he likes David Brooks, the columnist. Even though he often disagrees with him, he respects his intellect. And the way the conversation ended, as Paul Ryan said, as Kevin McCarthy told to me, the president said, "Well, if you're going to get something done, you need me." And Kevin McCarthy walked away. Now, I went to the president's staff and told them that. We always go to both sides, get two sides to it, just like a lawyer would. And when they told this to the president, he said that he was not sitting there alone reading his BlackBerry, that he was sitting next to Ken Burns, who made the historic series about the Civil War, the one about baseball, and looking at family pictures. And I sent this email around, and somebody said to me, "No wonder he hates these guys." So there just is a failure to communicate between those two ends of Capitol Hill that doesn't look like it's going to change. Now, I think it will over time, and here's why. You look at any public opinion survey. I had the chance to visit with some of you before this. If you were to take a survey in this room, there would be a clear sentiment that people want Washington to work together. Ironically, and there's not a lot that George W. Bush and President Obama have in common, but one of the things that they have in common is a big reason that they were elected was that people thought that they could make Washington work together. There's some people here from Texas. You know that George W. Bush, working with Democrats in Texas, was genuine. He really did that. And there were many reasons that President Obama was elected in 2008. One of the big ones was that people thought he was different. People did think that he could make Washington work, that he could crack the code here. And they both got to Washington, and neither one of them made as much effort as people would have thought. Bob Woodward came out with a book a few months ago. A lot of you read. It was a bestseller, as Woodward books tend to be, about the effort for the last big deal on the budget, the last effort to solve our problems for some years into the future. And the most interesting little tidbit that was in that book was that on election night in 2010, when Republicans took over the House of Representatives, when House Minority Leader John Boehner was about to become Speaker of the House, John Boehner, the president wanted to call him and congratulate him. And it turned out there was no one in the West Wing that had John Boehner's cell phone. And that told you a little bit about the rocky road that was going to come ahead. Now, let's talk a little bit about what the president is thinking. The best question that ever asked by that excellent political commentator, Jay Leno. He'll ask people, "What were you thinking?" And so I often think, what is the president thinking? And the one word that I can give you for the president at this moment is confident. And you'll see that reflected in the people that he's picking to join his administration, in his legislative strategy, in the way that he is playing the cards that he has. During campaigns, the candidates, whether they're in the White House or whether they're running for the White House, they like to go to non-traditional media because their correct thinking is that if you're reading Politico, or if you're reading the New York Times or watching MSNBC or watching Fox, you've probably made up your mind. But if you're watching ESPN, you might well not have. And so that's why the president spends a lot of time filling out his bracket each year with ESPN. He made a video for ESPN when he had NASCAR drivers come to the White House. It's why the President Bush used to do things with running magazines. It's why Mrs. Obama does things with cooking magazines, because you're reaching people with your message, with your personality that might be persuaded, that might have their minds made up. So on the first Obama campaign, and some of you have been on the campaign planes, and they're all the same, whether it's Air Force One or whether it's a regular somebody who's running for office, They have the president, they have the candidate, and their staff up in the front of the plane. And then they have the Secret Service or the security is sort of a DMZ in the middle, and we're in the back and stay there. And it's very rare that if you're in the back where we are, that you get invited to come up to the front. But if you get an interview with the candidate or the president, you get brought up to the front. And everybody knows it, it's no secret, and everybody's very jealous. So Us Magazine wanted to cover then Senator Obama, who was running for office. And the campaign said, there's a lot of people who read Us who might not have made up their mind about us, and so we should talk to them. So not only did Us Magazine get a seat on the campaign plane, but at the time that the president was not giving interviews to the New York Times or the AP or to Politico, Us Magazine was invited to come up front for an interview. And often the candidate's president will say something very interesting in these sort of more casual interviews, something that a late night host might ask them that NPR would not. Interestingly enough, the most detailed, specific comments that this president has ever made about drones were where? I bet someone here knows. Jon Stewart. He went on with Jon Stewart, and Stewart asked him, they clowned around a little bit, but he asked him a question about drones, and the president answered it. And to this day, it's the most specific thing he's ever said on camera about drones. So similarly, Us Magazine asked a lot of very good questions, very serious questions. But then they asked the question that you'll remember Bill Clinton got asked when he was on MTV, boxers or briefs? And then Senator Obama had a great answer for that. He said, I've learned not to answer those embarrassing questions. But I'll tell you this, whichever it is, I look good in them. And that is this president's worldview. He's been reelected. He has his legacy as the remarkable accomplishment of, as Bobby Jindal, Louisiana governor, said the other night with the president on the stage. Jindal said, it's clear I'm never going anywhere in politics, even though he'd like to be president in 2016. He says, it's clear I'm not going anywhere in politics because where is a skinny, dark guy with a funny name going to go in politics? That's what this president has overcome. This president's name is in the history books. We know what the first name of this, what's going to go under the president's portrait over the years when he's looked back on. And so what he gets now is gravy. And so he can afford to drive a very hard bargain, and he's doing that. Now, even though there's not much personal connection between the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, there are more signs that a little legislation, that some work is going to be done this year. The sequester, there's no sign that the budget cutbacks are going to be undone anytime in this fiscal year. So until September 30th, at least those are in place. There's no sign of those being done. This idea of a grand bargain, no one except the press is talking about that. Leaders on both sides say that's not in the cards. The next time that it will be discussed is probably in July. That's the next time that the debt ceiling will kick in. And so there'll be a conversation about what exactly Speaker Boehner's ransom will be at that time for raising the debt ceiling. They're going to talk about that when they come back from the upcoming Easter break. But that's pretty far off. But before that, there are signs of gun legislation, probably with three prongs. One, to punish traffickers. Two, to revive a Clinton-era program that would give schools funding to put a uniformed police officer in schools if they want to. This is a little different than the NRA proposal, where you could have an angry dad who was armed in a school. So they're not going that way. But that's, I'm just told that there's a very good prospect for that. And then third, and the one that has the most promise and that they're going to work out is background checks. So those three things will probably get done on guns. Something that's changing before our eyes is that there could very well be a much more muscular immigration plan than I would have told you even a couple weeks ago. With both Senator Marco Rubio of Florida and now, as of today, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, two Republicans certainly running in 2016, maybe the two most certain to be running, with both of them backing the toughest part of an immigration bill, which is some sort of a path to citizenship. Somebody who's very involved in these conversations said they see a 95% chance of a real immigration bill getting out of the Senate, a 90% chance of it getting out of the House and going to the president's desk. That's something that we wouldn't have predicted only a very short time ago. And that takes me to a quick thing about where the two parties are at as we look ahead to 2016. You saw that yesterday the Republicans came out with their autopsy on the last election, what they did wrong, what they need to do differently. And it was 100 pages long, but they could have saved the 100 pages. And Karl Rove said from day one that what they needed to do was to reverse engineer the Obama campaign. And that was the 100 pages was a long way of saying that all the things that Jim Messina talked to you about yesterday, including their very shrewd use of people's social networks, which now corporations are doing, that through their data analytics, they were able to email you and say, these 10 Facebook friends of yours would probably be Obama voters if you reached out to them. Click here to do that. Click here to forward them something. And they found these remarkable rates of people both being willing to do that and people responding once they had forwarded that to them. That person-to-person connection, which was, and this is the part that Jim Messina won't tell you, which was a strategy of necessity for the Obama campaign. They recognized that they weren't going to be able to run the sort of optimistic, broad-minded campaign that they did before. Instead, they had to run this very surgical campaign, as he told you about how he told the president, like, you're going to have to run a different campaign. And that's what it was very ruthless, surgical, specific, as opposed to the totally opposite way that they won the White House before. And that turned out to be very effective and something that only now are Republicans trying to catch up with. The dilemma for Democrats is that a lot of that was Obama-driven as opposed to being Democrat-driven. And that's why Democrats don't start 2016 or even 2014, the off-year elections that many of you will be involved in. They don't start that with the kind of head start that you might have expected that they would, because there's that X factor. We just don't know how much of that is Obama personally. And both campaigns benefited enormously from Obama personally. Because he was cool, because people were interested in him, he was able to get remarkable talent at the top of his campaigns and remarkable turnout. You had this astonishing feat by the campaign where the percentage of African Americans in Ohio who turned out in 2012 was higher than the percentage that turned out in 2008. And I don't think any of the great political minds up here on this table would have predicted that. But it was because of the beauty shop and barbershop registration program that the Obama campaign did, and because they cared about this president, they were willing to do it. But so that we don't know how big the head start is, but there's no question that it's a remarkable head start. And you would think, just on paper, you would think that this being roughly a 50-50 nation, and maybe it's 55-45 now, but it's pretty 50-50-ish. You would think, based on 200 years of history, that in the next election, that the Republican Party would have a great chance. That it's in a 50-50-ish nation, the chances of voters electing a Democrat 3 times in a row, very small, very rare over our 200 years of history. But what you saw yesterday with the Republican Party announcing their plan for the next 4 years was them trying to catch up to, in 2016, where the Obama campaign was in 2012. And there's a real irony to this, because a lot of you will remember that it was only 2004 when Republicans had the clear technological high ground, when Republicans were the ones who were doing the pioneering MicroStrategy techniques, where they were looking at individual voters and for the first time taking a voter file and marrying magazine subscription information with it and credit card information with it, other consumer data with it, where they were buying ads that just targeted health clubs and workout gyms because they saw support among 30-year-old males for Senator Kerry softening, and they said, where can we really lock that in? And they did their targeted ads in gyms. Karl Rove decided that if you drive a snowmobile, you're probably a Republican. And I'm not sure how he decided that, but that was a great tool for them because since you have to register a snowmobile, there is databases from that you can buy. So he was able to buy the snowmobile database for Wisconsin, which then was a swing state, and that was his crown jewels. Now they lost Wisconsin anyway, but that was how they went about the campaign. But then you come to 2008, and that totally flipped. Like many of the people in this room have worked on campaigns, and you know that most of the time you give away your yard signs, your bumper stickers, your hats. You're happy to have people take them. But because Obama was cool in 2008, he was able to sell that stuff. So you would go to a state fair, and the McCain people were trying to give away their yard signs, and the Obama folks were selling them. And so they did something for the first time. It had never been done, and now every campaign does it at every level. When you paid for that yard sign or that T-shirt or that bumper sticker, they wrote it down. They took your data. And not only did that give them your text number or your email to communicate with you, persuade you, turn you out, get you to volunteer, but they then reported the cost of that bumper sticker as a campaign contribution, which allowed them to vastly bring down the average value for their contributions that they could put out. And it was very smart, and it worked, and now everyone does it. Similarly, because Obama was cool, people from Google and Facebook came out to his headquarters in Chicago and worked for free, advised him, allowed him to optimize his online efforts, most especially his fundraising. And they discovered, for instance, that, and a lot of you have websites, whether it's for work or community involvement, but we're all digital marketers now, and you just want people to click one more time, right? And they discovered that the way to get people to click one more time was not a picture of Barack Obama, it was not a donkey. They found that the way to get people to click one more time was a picture of the then senator with his family. That if you put the Obama family up there, that's what made people most likely to give again. Similarly, they found that if they gave you a cup or a koozie or some sort of an Obama gift or swag or prize, that you were more likely to give. But they discovered through testing that you were not more likely to give a second time if they did that. So they didn't. And it was funny, this year you went back to their website and it was the same thing. There was the president with his family, give once and you get a goodie, give twice, you don't. And so they were able to discover all that. Then this time, they were able to take it to the next level that Messina talked about. So that's the challenge for Republicans, is how do they at the same time both catch up to the Obama campaign, which was basically running a 2016 campaign in 2012, and how do they move ahead? Now, real quick, to look at candidates for 2016, and then I'd love to bring you into the conversation, hear your questions. We think that one of my little sayings is, and some of you have heard me say this before, one of my little sayings is that what's good for the press is bad for America and vice versa. And this is definitely an example of one of those. We think it is very unlikely that we will have the Democratic primary that we would love to cover between Secretary Clinton and Vice President Biden. It's very unlikely they're going to run against each other when you talk to their people, but what you do hear by both watching what they're doing, including Secretary Clinton yesterday, modifying her position on gay marriage, bringing it more where the president is, what you're going to see is both of them building organizations, both of them getting ready to run. You're seeing Vice President Biden do a lot more political travel. He's going to be down in some early primary states, South Carolina, Iowa, New Hampshire, your states that get that early love, they're going to get vice presidential love. They're both going to build organizations, and then I think fairly quickly, one of them will be able to make the argument that they are more suited to carry the Obama torch than the other one. And so we're probably not going to get the face-off, but until that's worked out, the organization, people, big fundraisers aren't going to go with anyone. Important endorsements like ones in this room are going to stay back. On the other side, at the moment, there's Jeb Bush and everyone else. Jeb Bush knows that he can wait, like Secretary Clinton, he can wait longer than anyone else to show his cards, that whenever he gets in, that he will be a big favorite, both because of his Florida image, because of the Bush family financial network. So he can wait longer than others. What we hear from people who work with him and for him is that he's, and we saw this a little bit on his book tour a couple weeks ago, that he's more thinking about it. He's thinking about more than he was. People think that it's unlikely that he will eventually do it, but the dilemma that you have with all these guys, and this includes with Paul Ryan, who we think is probably not going to run, but there's no point in him saying that because we're much more interested in him and are going to give him much more of a platform while we think that he might run. So then after him, you have Marco Rubio, who would be the favorite, except for one reason, and that is that whoever we think is the favorite never is. Oh, it never is. I tell people, when we started Politico 6 years ago in 2007, when I'm in a meeting, I often will tell people, I could be wrong. When I give an idea, I could be wrong. And just to remind them of how wrong I can be, I remind them that when Politico started in 2007, I suggested that we call our presidential campaign section the Subway Series, because it was so obvious that the 2000 race was between Rudy and Hillary. They would just go ahead and call it that. So we're never right about the front runner. And also, 4 years is a very long time to have a target on your back, which is what Marco Rubio has, which makes it very difficult. So that looks ahead a little bit. I'd love to bring you into the conversation. Mr. President, if there's any questions up here, things you disagree with, you think I was wrong about, rebut, if you want to ask about the press, about politics, anything you want to ask about, I'm game.
Mike, I'll ask you a question. I don't want to catch you short, but do you have a view? I know you have your view of the gubernatorial races that we're going to be facing all across the country, which, of course, for us is very critical.
Right. President Scheberger, that's a great question, and it happens quick in Virginia and New Jersey, and then after that, a bunch of big ones. And I will say that what we're going to see with those governor's races, especially the 2014 ones, is, as we so often do, we're going to see that as the road test of 2016. And we're going to see whether Republicans are just talking about their investment that they're making in data in minority communities. Interestingly enough, this is an astonishing fact, and if you're a Republican, this is a sobering fact. Mitt Romney did worse with Asian Americans than he did with Hispanics. So that shows how deep a hole Republicans are in. And Republicans say that they're going to spend the next year and a half, 2 years, tapping into these communities, going to their events, and building toward 2016. But the first indication of that is going to be the governor's races. And specifically right away, we're in New Jersey, where we see Chris Christie, who I think some of y'all may disagree with this. I think Chris Christie will be a strong presidential candidate. I think that it goes along with the idea that people want Washington to work. I think if you at least ask them in polls, people want honest, blunt talk. And if you believe at all in markets, you believe that eventually people are going to get what they want. But so he'll be strong. Virginia, which I covered for so long, which looked like a red state for so long in national and statewide races, now clearly a purple state, so you can't call a favorite there. So these governor's races are going to be a great laboratory, and you all are in the front row of that, which is exciting. Other questions?
And with that, Mike,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you for
Please,
the honor of
join-
speaking to you.